analysts in Washington identify key challenges to democratic elections in Africa and ways of improving the electoral process. How the Trump administration travel ban is impacting the unaccompanied refugee minors program. And a closer look at forgotten Ugandan local sports that are being resurrected. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Now we'll have those stories in a moment, but first, migrants making the dangerous trek to the shores of Italy continue to be a major problem for the European Union. The United Nations Refugee Agency says the core of the European migrant crisis is in Libya. On Friday, 1,400 migrants arrived by boat in Italy's Catania port. The migrants disembarking a Coast Guard ship were part of more than 4,000 people who have been plucked from boats in the Mediterranean Sea over the past few days. Their arrival comes as the Italian government, looking to stem the flow of migrants into the country, has drawn up a draft code of conduct for non-government organizations operating in the Mediterranean. Now, the 11-point plan is expected to be presented in the coming days to some 9 NGOs who regularly deploy rescue boats to international waters just off the Libyan coast.
So we really hope that a code of conduct will have the spirit to have and embrace all the subjects, the NGOs, the merchant vessels, and all the subjects that even the military that are there rescuing these people. And we should not forget, however, that the real core of the problem is not the presence of an NGO in the central Mediterranean, but the core of the problem is before. The core of the problem is about thousands of people that are adrift in Libya, not at sea, but in Libya and Niger, and that are risking to put their lives in the hands of smugglers.
But our Libya spiraled into turmoil after the 2011 overthrow of ruler Muammar Gaddafi. Since then, rival governments and armed alliances have been competing for power. A UN-backed government in Tripoli has struggled to impose its authority and has been rejected by factions in the east. Now, the political chaos and security vacuum has allowed Islamist militant groups to gain a foothold and human traffickers to thrive. Now, for more insight on the situation, Renan Smith, Managing Director of Libya Analysis and Eye on ISIS in Libya, joins me live via Skype from Cambridge, UK. Good evening, Ms. Smith.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, now, how could the approach to solving the migrant crisis change if the focus actually shifted to the thousands of people that are adrift in Libya and Niger rather than those at sea?
I think it's important to remember that migration is a phenomenon that crosses borders, continents, entire countries, and therefore you're very right, you can't just focus on the Mediterranean. And although equally Libya is not, the source of the problem, people are coming from all over sub-Saharan Africa, crossing through Libya, it's in Libya that this problem has spiraled since 2011, and increased instability and economic deterioration has meant a lot of the migrants that used to travel to Libya to work there can no longer do that because the circumstances are so poor and because there are no longer jobs there. And on the other hand, the militias who are running the trafficking rings and who are often keeping these migrants in really deplorable humanitarian conditions and are putting them onto these boats in which they often drown, are also taking advantage of this same instability, insecurity, lack of governance, and also the lack of economic stability, which means that smuggling provides a way of earning living for many of these militias.
And talking about instability in Libya, the hope was to have all Libyan armed and political factions unite in a national government. What are the prospects at the moment?
Well, so there is a UN-backed government of national accord based in Tripoli, and that does have some support. However, it has very little real power on the ground outside of Tripoli and none really as well outside of Western Libya, and it has failed to unite all of the different factions and militias in Libya. So although there are some talks still going on, the political process has largely stalled. Now, there are some hopes that the US may be soon going to sort of reinvigorate its Libya policy, which could be very positive. However, on the other side, we have Khalifa Haftar, a general and a strong man in eastern Libya who is being supported by Egypt and the UAE. And there is a danger that what may happen is, instead of supporting different Libyan factions to try and form this elusive unity government, that what will actually happen is some of these regional powers will push for Haftar to militarily stabilise Libya and try to take over by power, which is likely to create greater conflict and actually prolong the instability and lack of governance.
Now, in Libya, ISIS, or IS, has featured quite prominently. What role is ISIS playing in destabilizing Libya even further, and what are the implications to the entire region?
Well, yes, so ISIS did have territory in Libya. They were quite strong. They are currently on the back foot, so they've lost most of their territory in Libya, almost all of their territory. There are still fighters there, and there are other jihadist groups as well who are equally as dangerous, Al-Qaeda-linked groups, who are still present in Libya. However, it's important to remember that they are a symptom of Libya's existing problems rather than being the reason that they were destabilised. And it's actually these kind of the instability, lack of security, marginalisation of large communities that both allows jihadist groups to gain a foothold, and we may well see ISIS regain and re-strengthen in the country. But it's these same conditions that allow the trafficking and smuggling of people across Libya, and that also make it so dangerous for many of the people that are doing this dangerous journey, whether in Libya or then making their journey onwards north across the Mediterranean.
And very quickly, you get a sense we're here for the long haul, or is this something that can be fixed in the next few months or years?
Well, I think both migration, the Libyan political situation, and jihadism, these are all problems that actually need long-term solutions. Although it's very desirable for, certainly in Europe, for example, to have an end to the migration problems, for Libya to suddenly have a stable and secure government, which means often leaning towards kind of strongman types, actually this will not solve the problems. This will be a short-term kind of band-aid fix, when really what we need is long-term investment to really get to the root of these problems in Libya and across the whole region, to really find long-term solutions that can kind of address the root problems.
Actually, one thing that has been a kind of headache to many African observers is to what extent are African nations involving themselves in both the migration crisis and also the conflict in Libya?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the conflict in Libya, there hasn't been too much involvement from sort of sub-Saharan Africa. However, the Sahel regions are playing a key role. So countries like Niger, Chad, Sudan, there are many reports of various sort of militias and mercenaries from these countries who are actively involved either with jihadi groups or with different sides of the Libyan conflict in that region. And there is a big trade in smuggling of sort of drugs, weapons, people, subsidised goods that goes on in the Sahel region. So, this is a real potential for destabilisation, not just in Libya, but in wider across the Maghreb region, and of course down further south. So I think the role that African states, particularly the Sahel states, have to play in Libya and in the wider crisis is certainly very key and hasn't really been delved into in too much detail.
Ms. Smith, thank you very much. We appreciate your perspective.
Welcome.
Rhiannon Smith is the Managing Director of Libya Analysis and Eye on ISIS in Libya. Now, as countries like Kenya, Liberia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo prepare to hold elections, analysts in Washington are trying to identify key challenges to democratic elections in Africa and ways of improving the electoral process. Viewers Mariam Diallo reports.
Recent peaceful democratic transitions of power in Nigeria, Ghana and Benin are considered examples for other African nations. Kenya will hold its general election in August and Liberia in October. But it's less likely the Democratic Republic of Congo will hold its planned elections this year. This week, the DRC's opposition group, Le Rassemblement, accused the country's Electoral Commission president of declaring war on the Congolese people by announcing that elections promised to be held by the end of this year probably will not take place. DRC's President Joseph Kabila was allowed to stay in power until late 2017 under a transition deal as long as elections were held by the end of this year. The U.S. insists that the agreement be fulfilled.
We are ready to take additional action to sanction those who stand in the way of the DRC's first democratic transition of power.
Last month in Pretoria, Kabila insisted his goal is to hold elections.
Let's organize elections together, as a nation, together as political parties, civil society. And we still have that objective in mind.
But more than just holding elections, Kabila has to go, according to a DRC social activist.
But the main problem actually for the DRC case is not having election this year, is getting the president to clearly say he's not gonna stay run again for the next term, because the agreement says they agreed he's not going to be a candidate, but he never said it clearly.
Elections should be viewed as part of the peace-building process, not as a goal in themselves, says democracy advocate Elizabeth Lewis. She says Africa has models to emulate.
I think Kenya is an example where kind of this look at broad-based constitutional and legal reform was a positive step.
As some countries face deadlocks and others' processes move along, a word of wisdom from a leading scholar.
We understand that elections do not by themselves a democracy make. However, they play a critical role. And free and fair elections play an essential role in sustaining democratic processes.
Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Washington.
Well, U.S. President Donald Trump is guest of honor at France's Bastille Day celebrations, marking the centennial of the U.S. entry into World War I. The festivities include a massive parade through the French capital featuring French troops, military bands and flyovers by American jet fighters. July 14th is the anniversary of the 1789 storming by rebels of the Bastille prison in Paris, an event that signaled the start of the French Revolution. Now this year, leaders are coupling the festivities with the 100th anniversary of the U.S. decision to enter the First World War. Well, meanwhile, President Trump is making no promises to change his decision on pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord, something that made for awkward moments on the first day of his trip to France. But as VOA's Luis Ramirez reports, Mr. Trump and new French President Emmanuel Macron focused on finding common ground on areas like Syria and counterterrorism.
With deep disagreements with his host over climate and trade, odds were stacked against a good visit for President Donald Trump. Questions about Russia and his campaign followed him across the Atlantic, but Trump also dealt with French concerns about his decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord.
Something could happen with respect to the Paris Accord. We'll see what happens. But we will talk about that over the coming period of time. And if it happens, that'll be wonderful. And if it doesn't, that'll be okay too.
On climate, we know what our disagreements are. We have shared them many times, and I think that it is important to see how we can advance on this subject. I respect the decision of President Trump.
Cordiality was the order of the day, and both leaders appear to be bent on getting off to a good start.
The United States remains committed to being a leader in environmental protection, while we advance energy security and economic growth. The friendship between our two nations, and ourselves, I might add, is unbreakable.
France rolled out the type of welcome it reserves for only its most distinguished visitors. With full fanfare, the American president visited Napoleon's tomb at Les Invalides. This visit is important for Macron as well. He needs to show he is a tough leader who can deal with a new U.S. leadership, no matter how big the differences. On Friday, Trump attends Bastille Day celebrations that are especially significant for America this year, marking the 100th anniversary of the U.S. entry into World War I. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, Paris.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered during the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends also. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Now, coming up, how the Trump administration travel ban is impacting the youngest refugees. Stay with us.
I wanted to present music and a side of American culture that is most important to me, that is a part of who I am. They're going to get some incredible performances. That's one of the things I love, bringing these artists in so you can get to see them do what they do. It's soul music, and that's what music is. It's that which comes from the soul.
Well, in Friday's financial report, the Nigerian Stock Exchange is moving closer to issuing shares. Here's Africa 54's business correspondent Jill Malandrino reporting from the NASDAQ market site in New York.
A bill that has passed a second reading by Nigeria's parliament could pave the way for the Nigerian Stock Exchange to issue its own shares, according to Reuters. That is the same type of structure U.S. exchanges have. For example, NASDAQ has issued shares trading under ticker symbol NDAQ. Now, the Nigerian Stock Exchange wants to change its ownership structure from a mutual firm of broker members to one owned by shareholders in an effort to improve governance and possibly open up new funding sources. By improving transparency in the Nigerian market, it could attract more foreign investment and incentivize companies to go public and access the capital markets. Oscar Onyemea, who we interviewed at the NASDAQ market site in 2016, he told Reuters in March that transforming the exchange into a for-profit organization will allow it to offer products beyond equities, bonds, and exchange-traded ETFs. The Johannesburg Stock Exchange is the most developed on the continent and listed its shares in 2016. Nigeria is the second biggest exchange in sub-Saharan Africa after Johannesburg and has roughly 200 listed companies, all included in its benchmark share index. From the NASDAQ market site in New York, I'm Jill Malandrino. This is Africa 54 Business News.
Well, the Trump administration's travel ban barring entry to the United States affects some of the world's most vulnerable citizens, children. The U.S. states certify adults as foster parents who act as guardians in place of a child's birth parents, who in many cases with refugees have died. Now, the travel ban complicates matters. Viewers Rasha Rabasadi has our report.
Oh, so it's got drawers for his stuff. This is a shirt we got him because it looked pretty cool.
This bedroom belongs to someone who may never see it.
At this point, we don't know when the kids are going to be able to arrive.
Kichelle Coleman works for Lutheran Social Services of the National Capital Area. The organization links refugee children with would-be foster parents.
There are literally millions of children who need a chance just to find themselves and not to be completely in survival mode.
Irene Stevenson is certified by the District of Columbia to foster a child. She's prepared her home to welcome a refugee girl from Somalia.
They wouldn't be in this situation if they hadn't lost everything. They wouldn't be in this situation and be up to becoming refugees here in the U.S. if they had anything left to lose.
People like Stevenson and the Rolbovskis in Maryland are now on uncertain footing because of the Trump administration's travel ban that includes refugees.
It's safe to say that we've spoke to probably close to 100 people about this, and no one has known what's going on.
That's partly because of ambiguous language in an executive order defining who is and is not considered close family to refugees attempting to travel to the United States.
As just citizens trying to interact with our government, it's really hard because we're just getting stonewalled and just don't know what the next action is if it's just saying, awaiting further guidance.
Neither the State Department nor Office of Refugee Resettlement responded to VOA's request for comment. But to these parents in waiting, government policy takes a backseat to welcoming a child into their homes.
The bedroom that you will have, I have blinds, but I don't have curtains because I want to meet her before I decide what color to get the curtains, all right?
Arash Erbasadi, VOA News, Washington.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, forgotten local sports making a comeback in Uganda. We'll be right back.
the real core of the problem is not the presence of an NGO in the Central Mediterranean, but the core of the problem is before.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Now, a new exhibition exploring the American civil rights movement and the politics of black identity in the United States has opened at London's prestigious Tate Modern Museum. Soul of a Nation, Art of Black Power also examines the triumphs and tragedies of the civil rights movement in the U.S. from the 1960s to 1980s, at a time when black culture identity was shifting. The exhibition's 168 artworks encompasses many of the social movements, including the Black Power, the Black Panthers, aiming to put an end to racial segregation and discrimination. Now, the exhibition will run through October the 22nd. Next up, 3 chocolate-colored spaniels, Mitch, Bobby, and Amy, received intensive training in Mali before joining the anti-poaching brigade charged with dismantling Mali's illegal trade in ivory. Ivory trafficking networks have devastated one of Africa's last desert elephant herds in Mali. Poaching has been rampant since Tuareg rebels and Islamists took over the north of the country in 2012, where lawlessness still reigns and ivory smuggling has flourished. The anti-poaching team will take the dogs on searches when they get intelligence about traffickers' hideouts. They should be able to help police make arrests. Well, and finally, rock star Kid Rock, an outspoken supporter of Republican President Donald Trump, hinted in website and social media messages that he intends to run for the U.S. Senate in 2018. The 46-year-old Michigan native drew attention on Twitter and his Facebook page to a Kid Rock 18 for U.S. Senate website with the tagline, "Are you scared?" The site also displays images of a T-shirt, baseball cap, and bumper sticker emblazoned with campaign logo, Kid Rock for U.S. Senate, and a box of alternating slogans, including "In Rock We Trust," "Party to the People," and "You Never Met a Politician Quite Like Me." And that is what is trending today. Now, for many years, a local sport in Uganda called Dulu and Kwepena were the go-to games for kids. Now, at a time when such games are being dissolved by new forms such as video games, Simon Peter Tumukunde is not about to let the history disappear. NBS TV Uganda's Daniel Sebakije tells the story of some forgotten local sports that are being resurrected.
Those of us who grew up in the early 90s should attest that we mostly enjoyed this game of Dulu as young boys. But with the technology that came, such games are being phased out. Davies and Sheriff are 2 rare kids of this generation still connected to the past that is quickly disappearing in the space of modern times. The hard drive of the piece is referred to as a blast that sends it to a distant spot. These Kamocha homegrown boys resurrected my memory on that indigenous game, a not so colorful one that earned those who indulged canes for soiling their clothes. As the boys were grounded by Dulu and football, the girls on the other side were weaving balls from polythenes which they would use in playing Kwepena. So those still living in humble neighborhoods that can ill afford PlayStations and iPads for their kids are still married to the old way. These girls display the joy of Kwepena. Simon Peter Tumukunde has interested himself in relaunching the spirit of the game that has since gone extinct and dressed in a new name, Cheza.
These are 4 meters long and this is 10.
This literally is the modern-day Kwepena. He devised a rule book for the sport and a court with defined dimensions where this sport can be enjoyed in a more professional setting. This 20-gram ball is the official match ball, and players are called dodgers and shooters depending on their role.
Now we have limits of teams in that we can have 5 people per team competing. Unlike the traditional version where we used to have chilindi, and you have about 100 people playing at the same time.
Peter's ultimate goal is to see this sport at the Olympics, and the first step to achieving that was to try to register the sport with the National Council of Sports. But perhaps the NCS boss then did not make sense of this young man's vision.
Unfortunately, we were chased away. We were told to stop. It was a very bad time for us. But we got an endorsement and a go-ahead from the Parliamentary Committee on Education and Sports at that time.
Now an adult, Vicky enjoyed Kwepena as a kid and she would love to revive the experience even as an adult.
It's more modernized. You don't get dirty and all, but the traditional fun is still around.
For those who can't afford the expensive court, a cheaper option is marking a flat space with white floor keen on its dimensions. Even on a beach, cheza can be played, a luxury perhaps the native game did not have. Beloved modern technology has expanded options in sport, but has on reverse swept indigenous forms, which questions whether next generations will ever test the thrill.
Web Daniel Sabachije for NBS TV in Kampala, Uganda.
Rather fascinating there. Now we end our program today with the music of Nigerian Tosin Aribisal and his Afrobeat jazz group. This is from their recent performance on VOA's Music Time in Africa radio program hosted by Heather Maxwell. On that note, and on behalf of our entire team, so long from Washington.
Welcome to English in a Minute. An alley is a narrow path between or behind buildings.
Up one's alley.
Does this expression have to do with city streets?
Jonathan, do you have any friends who teach singing?
Hello. I am a singer.
You are? Oh, awesome. Do you